Yeah, so earlier we saw that the Renaissance period is marked by it's a period which is kind of, there are a lot of highlights of this period in terms of artistic expressions, manifestations in terms of sculpture, in terms of landscaping, in terms of architecture, all these things. And the underlying idea being that it was inspiring for the Renaissance period intellectuals, artists to take examples from the Greco-Roman past, because they felt that their ideas, the ideas from the Greco-Roman past, were relevant, they were inspiring, they were fruitful for the current, that is 15th, 16th, 17th century lives of these people. Yeah, these are some of the representations of old ideas during the medieval period. Okay. The underlying philosophy, or not exactly underlying, but the accompanying philosophy, the contemporary philosophy of scholasticism, which was a part of Christian practice and ideology as well. This is something that also needs to be understood in order to fully comprehend what Renaissance is all about. We know that in 529 AD, Plato's academy was closed. Plato had died a long period ago, but his academy, that is his school, which gave education in secular or non-religious, religious kind of a fashion, was closed down in the 6th century. So the practice of transferring ideas from one generation to another, the whole process of education, which was done in a very matter of fact or a secular or a non-religious kind of a fashion, was kind of, it was given a break, and then onwards education became or it slowly kind of encroached or went under the cloak of religion. So schooling became a religious practice during the period of this rise of scholasticism. After the closing down of Plato's academy, people were, of course, practicing various professions and occupations, and that kind of occupational training was done in a completely different fashion. But the academic kind of learning, philosophical kind of learning that was earlier done, questioning, all these processes that were done in a secular fashion earlier, came to be halted after the closure of Plato's academy, and slowly it became the responsibility of the church to impart education to young people. Saint Benedict's monastery being one of the earliest, but from then onwards one can gradually witness that church becomes the authority, church becomes the agency to impart education, to transfer ideas from one generation to another for many centuries to come after this period. Even today, you know that in India, the best of schools are run by the convent and missions. So education and also eventually we'll see healthcare. These two are very, very important and basic kinds of services which are absolutely essential for all sorts of communities. These were slowly taken by the church, that is by the organized Christian religion and its authorities. This resulted in the de-secularization, as it were, of education, and education became more and more about religion. Once we speak of religion, we have to know that religare is to bind together. So the idea of religion is conformity, idea of the underlying principle of religion is to stick together as a group. And when we are speaking of secular education, it tells us to be independent. It tells us to question everything. It tells us to ask questions, to kind of be different, be unique than others. So this change from secular education to religious education is a profound process which results in a complete turnaround of the processes of thinking. People who were encouraged, that is, students who were encouraged to think differently, think uniquely, question everything in the earlier process, were now being, they were now expected to be conformists. They were expected to learn ideas, receive ideas, and just reproduce them, which has pretty much, continued right up until the 21st century. So we do not really encourage people to think originally, stand out differently. We want people to conform to whatever are the given ideas. So this is a process that happened around the 6th century AD, which resulted in their, this whole process of trying to understand the word of God. Then what is my understanding of a specific word? That is not important. What is the given understanding of that specific word becomes important, which means that whoever is the giver, whoever is the agent, whoever is the middleman between me and the word of God is a person who assumes a great deal of importance, obviously giving more and more strength to the agency which connects the, the deity with the devotee, which means obviously religious authorities become very, very important. These are some of the processes through which education was given, but the idea was conformity and not standing out. Some of the pictures that are from this period can be seen here. Is being given a copy of the Bible. What is the significance of being given a copy of the Bible? Significance is that Bible got translated in this period. There was a lot of translation activity that was happening. Just the way, for example, Gautam Buddha chose to speak in the language of the local people, in the Magadhi and the Prakrit and all sorts of local languages. Or Jnaneshwar, in case of Marathi, chose to give a Marathi interpretation of the philosophy of Gita for the Marathi audiences. Similarly, here we can see that during the 13th, 14th centuries, there were attempts to translate the Bible from the Hebrew language to the local current, whatever were the languages that were used in European territories. As a result of which, the ideas of God became more accessible for the followers. And this is something which was obviously not liked by the middlemen, by the authorities, but this is something that was considered as a great service by the common people, because they could now read and write the Bible, read and understand the Bible without the help from or without the guidance from the church authorities. So this is a period when lots of translation activity happens. Albertus Magnus from the 13th century gives an interpretation of Aristotle from Avicenna's translations. Here they are talking of back, getting the process that we call traction today. If your back is aching, then they'll tighten up the pressure in such a fashion that your spinal, the vertebral column, it kind of straightens up. So all these different medicinal practices, religious ideas, they were getting translated in the period of 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th centuries. Thomas Aquinas, he is somebody who gives this exposition of Aristotle's worldview, Aristotle, the younger one. That is, the world can be understood through empirical senses here and now. What was the result of this whole process of scholastic activity, of translations, of reinterpretations of religious texts, and of learning and transferring the ideas of the Bible from one generation to another? Here are some of the effects that were kind of unexpected, but which happened because of this whole process of scholasticism and the non-secular education getting a lot of importance. What happened because of that? First and foremost, once education began to be popularized through the powerful agencies such as the church, there were more and more and more people who were trying to learn and read and understand the word of God. And obviously, once you know how to read the Bible, you also know how to read the other texts, because once you have learned the skill, you've learned the skill. You can't really unlearn it. So these are the people who began to read, write, understand, exchange ideas about various things, which resulted in a change in the sense that earlier it was understood, it was felt that human beings are just incapable of understanding the enormity of God's intentions, activities, his charisma, so to speak. But now there was this little change or different trajectory altogether, which evolved from religious education, wherein human beings were given this recognition that they are capable of understanding the truth, provided they try hard enough. So the agency of a human being to understand truth is slowly getting recognized. Secondly, world becomes a valid subject of knowledge. That is, earlier it was believed during the Greco-Roman period also, during the ancient period also, the first centuries of the Common Era, it was believed that the true knowledge consists of knowing the word of God, ideas about God, spiritual, blah, 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 everything. And what is happening around you is not really very important. But now, with the widening of horizons or the widening of the circle of people who could read and write and understand ideas, the world became a valid subject of knowledge. That is, you can understand about, it's okay to understand about plants, it is okay to understand and study about animals, about geography, about archaeology, whatever. Not archaeology, but geology and stuff. So trying to have knowledge about the material world around you became a valid, acceptable activity. Of course, within scholasticism, it has, there were problems, there were issues, because this essentially was an activity that was rooted in religion, conformity, and so on and so forth. So the emphasis was on the words, their interpretation, what is meant by what, such and such, heuristics, hermeneutics kind of a thing. But still, this is something which led to schooling and eventually, gradually, universities such as Bologna, which is the oldest university in the world, and Oxford and Paris and Cambridge started coming up. These were initially centers of religious education. Eventually, they started kind of expanding into non-religious, that is secular domains. Even today, you know that many of the colleges of the Oxford University, they have these religious names, Jesus and Mary, Saint so and so, all these names. So education indeed was something which was closely supervised, monitored, controlled by religious authority. But in spite of all these things, it began to change the outlook of the people, in the sense that more and more people started getting education, one. Secondly, world, that is the world around you, secular domain, started getting the recognition that it's okay to understand about music, learn about arts, learn about stones, about plants, about animals, so on, and anatomy also, human and others anatomy. So this is the process of scholasticism, the ideas of scholarly activity that was happening around this period, around Renaissance period. This is also the period when crusades have happened already. This is an earlier century, first crusade to some of the last crusades. Point here is not how much or what exactly was won and what was lost, or who won and who lost in the various different crusades. Point is that there is cultural exchange between the people who adhered to different faiths. Now, this, of course, is a very, very prejudiced kind of a picture. You can see that Philip and Richard taking the keys of the acre, which is an area in Jerusalem, from the people who are defeated. So it's shown as if these defeated people are really poor and uncultured and all those things. And Philip and Richard are shown in all their glory and grandness as if they are already, kings and very pompous kind of representation. But for us, it's important to know that this is a kind of a documentation of the strife that was happening, of the exchange that was happening, of the interaction, however violent, was happening between the Islamic world and the Christian world, between the people from the Arab and Islamic and Eastern and Asian kinds of people and the European kind of people. So the war is, or the battles are not just battles, they are also exchange of technologies, they are also Q&A of technology, as we saw in the earlier half of the lecture. That is, if your enemy is using gunpowder, then you are going to use a different kind of technology for protecting yourselves from that gunpowder technology. If your enemy is going to use your bow and arrow, then you will have catapults and stuff. You won't have huge ramparts for protecting yourselves from gunpowder. So technology transfer also happens when there are crusades and when there are such violent interactions as well. This is one of the representations of the Battle of Nicopolis. One of the many battles which were fought in a very bloody fashion. Okay, this is where we'll stop for the English medium students, and we'll start with Petrarch and the ideas of humanism from the next lecture onwards. Humanism is the ideology wherein humans get the center stage of the universe of thinking people. This is where I'll stop for the English medium and resume the Marathi lecture. Any questions, doubts?